Hello? 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 Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Hope all is well in India. It's a very dull day in London. We don't have much sun, quite mild, but we're all looking on the bright side as we continue to move forward and ease in of lockdown, which is good. And I hope that things are moving forward in India. I'm sure they are. Remember, the future's bright, the future's IAHM, and you, the students, are the future. This morning, we're going to talk about organoleptic assessment of the senses, the way the senses play an important part in the way we evaluate food. And we call this organoleptic assessment. Our eyes, our taste, our smell, our hearing, all play an important part in the way that we receive information about food. When the functions of various senses have been understood, it is possible to calculate the interaction of food and drink and to assess the quality recognition. Quality being measured in terms of the customer satisfaction and how we appeal to the customer's senses. Organoleptic perception is the registration of our senses upon the way we receive our receptors, or in other words, the impressions gained by the receipt of imposing factors upon any of the senses. From this, the mind gains an appreciation of what is being transmitted to it by its sensory perceptors. So our mind creates what's being transmitted by our nose, by our mouth, our tongue, our hearing, etc. A person's sensory perception enables them to appreciate what is in effect their own highly personal evaluation. And this is very subjective evaluation and appreciation of what is being offered. And this is Cracknell and Nobis, who were the first two chefs to really start to teach about the importance of the senses. Now, temperature and taste is very important. The temperature at which food is served has a bearing on the taste and the pleasure in eating. Sometimes the anticipation of the dish is ruined by the incorrect temperature when it's served, either too hot or too cold. The location of temperature sense is in the tongue and the soft palate, where there are specific receptors for either cold or warm sensations. The two extremes of taste bitter and sweet cannot be perceived in food served at extreme temperatures below freezing and above 60 degrees C. I hope you've all got this PowerPoint because they're very important temperatures in this PowerPoint, which will help you in your culinary understanding. The ideal range of temperature recording degrees of sweetness intensity is between 16 degrees C and 35 degrees C. And any sweet dishes eaten below or above this range have to remain in the mouth to reach 36.8 degrees C before they can be correctly identified. Bitter tastes register best at low temperature from 3 degrees C to 16 degrees C and decrease by as much as a third at temperatures of 16 degrees C and 42 degrees C. Taste perception. The taste of food is perceived by our taste buds, which are on our tongue, which are the papillae, or the small protuberances, of which there are 4 groups, some more sensitive than others. The fungiform papillae are located near the surface, whilst the circumvallata and the filiform are fibrous papillae are in the grooves of the tongue. Now, you should have on your PowerPoint how the tongue works. And our taste buds live for only a few days before they become degenerate and being replaced by new ones. So in that PowerPoint, you will see, and I'm not going to go in great detail, but you will see how complex our tongue is and how complex the taste buds are. So taste buds, or taste perception, is very limited, and only the 4 main tastes of bitter, sweet, saline and acid are markedly noticeable, and although the number of taste sensations is extremely large, they stem from these 4 tastes. This means they need to be assisted by their sense of smell to be fully effective. The sense of smell enhances the taste. Now, when you get a cold or you're bunged up, you say you can't taste. In effect, you can't smell. Because what happens is that your olfactory epithelium, which is in your nose, if you cover that and hold that tightly like this, you can't smell. And that affects your taste. The taste buds are distributed around the tongue, the top being capable of sensing all the tastes, but mainly the sweet ones. Bitter tastes are felt by the back, and the sour and salty ones by the center and the edge of the tongue. The concentration of taste and the temperature of food both have an effect upon the taste sensation. And that's very important when we're preparing and serving food. Now, you will have yet another diagram there, which you will see the taste buds, the taste cells. And again, this just tells you how complex our tongue is and our sense of taste is. And then you can see how it all links together and then sends senses to the brain. What you have in front of you, or you should have, is, for example, which tongue are you? And we all have different types of tongue, in the sense that when we've got a blood deficiency, we will have a different type of tongue. That's why when you go to the doctor, they say, hold out your tongue, because from your tongue, they can see what exactly your health state is. So you have the normal tongue, the fatigue, the poor appetite tongue, when you feel hot, the hot tongue, the damp retention, the blood status. So with your illnesses, when you are unwell, your tongue changes. And that's why often your sense of taste changes. Again, what you've got in front of you in your PowerPoint is the guide to bitter, where the bitter is, where the salt is, the sweet is. Unami, which is this Asian taste that's been discovered some years ago, and the sour. And it just shows you how complex, again, the tongue is and how important the tongue is. And then you can enlarge that diagram again about how the taste, our sense of taste is then so complicated that it sends messages to the brain. And this is a better one. If you go on to slide 14, you will see how complex it all knits together. So taste is extremely complicated. So the senses. So that's the tongue. Now we're going to look at sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. The senses depend on the physiological system which affects the body as a whole, as it maintains a correct balance of nutrients which will culminate in a state of well-being. And this stems from the hypothalamus, which has the power to satisfy hunger from stored sources within the body. Sight. Sight is very, very important in gastronomy, as it gives the first reaction to the food as it's presented and initiates the other senses to a particular reaction. Familiar foods are recognized, and unfamiliar ones may give rise to the state of alertness, which will last until the food is tasted and perhaps approved. So sight, we eat with our eyes. Sight is very important. It is often suggested that the man possesses, a woman possesses, an inbuilt warning system which decides which foods are safe to eat and which are unsafe. This system is obviously connected with vision, and color is important. So if we see something that is moldy, something which doesn't look right, our sight tells us not to eat it. So it's a warning system. And color is important in the reaction. The color on foods and meals have an effect on appetite. That's why we try to make food colorful and attractive by creating an emotional response for either acceptance or rejection. And often the customer will say, oh, that looks nice. Oh, I like the look of that. Perhaps they didn't like, or they didn't want a dessert. But when they see the dessert and they see how colorful it is and how attractive it is, oh, I will have some of that then. Colors in the violet and blue spectrum are associated with toxic alkalis, and foods in this color spectrum are usually rejected. Blue should never be used with food. Blue should never be used because it is a color that's associated with toxic alkaloids, and foods in this color spectrum are usually rejected. There is also an association of color with flavor. As shown in the early experiment with the flavored jelly, it becomes more difficult to identify the flavor without the aid of color. So the famous, when we talk about the jelly, the famous jelly, I'm sure you may have done it, where you color the different color jellies, but you flavor them differently. So you may have a red jelly, but you may flavor it with orange. And people find it very difficult to associate that red or that flavor with orange, because automatically you see red as raspberry or strawberry. When a person is blind, they must identify foods without the aid of vision. The reason for blindfolds in tasting experiments. And that's the important, that's why we taste. When we do product development, we actually do a lot of blind tastings. The difference for sighted people when deprived of their sense of vision to that of a non-sighted person is that the blind person has the advantage of an enlightened awareness in other senses of touch, smell, and taste. With these factors of the sense of vision, in mind, the food processing industry can have problems when it processes certain foods, as their natural color is modified during production. It then has to be restored by artificial means to make the food acceptable to the consumer. So we as consumers expect a strawberry flavored jelly to be red. And if it's pink, we reject it. Or if it's orange, we reject it, because we associate color with certain flavors. In the United Kingdom, for example, table margarine has to be colored yellow to make it similar to butter. Whilst in Germany and Italy, where mostly unsalted butter is used, margarine is white like butter. So the idea of colouring margarine yellow is to make it look like our butter. But unsalted butter is more white. And so the margarine in Germany, is white. Custard. Traditional custard is made from egg yolks. French custard, egg yolks, sugar, milk. Custard powder is made from corn flour, sugar, and milk. It's coloured yellow because it has to look like traditional French custard. That's why custard powder is coloured yellow. Because if it's white, people do not associate it as custard. The eyes are stimulated by electromagnetic energy, but the ears respond to mechanical energy or pressure changes in the atmosphere. The auditory sense is not given as much attention in the food business as other senses. Most foods are sold by smell rather than sound, although a number of snacks have recently been sold by sound, and the most famous breakfast cereal, Rice Krispies, are called Snack, Crackle and Pop. And these are Rice Krispies where when you add the milk, they start to crackle, and have been sold to generations of children by sound, telling them how it tastes. So sound relation to taste. The sound of people guzzling, enjoying their food is considered by many to be bad manners, and it's only the sounds made by food that are pleasurable. For example, the sizzle of steak or fish in the pan, the snap of crudité, the pop of champagne cork. All these are sounds acceptable in eating places, but bad manners they are not. In Japan, when you go to a noodle bar, it is perfectly acceptable, and people do it, to slurp their noodles. And that's not bad manners. That's what they expect to hear in the restaurant because you're enjoying your food. In other parts of the world, it is considered bad manners. Taste is a very personal thing. Taste is very subjective. The Romans, and we talked about the Romans last week or whatever, the last time I talked to you about the Romans, had a great influence in gastronomy, said there is no accounting for it. There are many other sayings related to food. One man's meat is another man's poison. No doubt you can think of many more, but the development of man's taste in food over time differ greatly from one society to another, from one culture to another, over different periods of time, and from one individual to another, according to our culture, our food habits, our taste, our training, our knowledge of food, age, and education. And most importantly, our socialization, how we as children are brought up to accept different types of food. Brillat-Savarin, the great gastronome, suggested that taste can be considered under three headings. In physical man, it is the apparatus by which he is able to distinguish various flavors. In moral man, it is the sensation which stimulates the organ at the center of feelings, which is influenced by any savor body. Its own original taste is the properly possessed by any given substance which can influence the organ and give rise to the sensation. So that's Brillat-Savarin's view on taste. In eating food, several judgments are brought into play and involve not only the flavor or taste, but also the quality, the harmony of the blended foodstuffs that make the dish. It should all be combined to aid digestion. Each food has its own odor, made up of its natural smell, and that of any other that is added during the processing into the meal. These smells, if balanced correctly, help to increase the flow of the saliva, which is essential for digestion. So it gets our saliva going, the smell, and which is important for our digestion. If the mouth is filled with pieces of insoluble food, the tongue would be unable to taste, only to feel the food. So the taste, we also require moisture. Teeth cut up food and add saliva to produce a juice, which stimulates the buds and allows the body to function and accept the swallowing of the food into the digestive system, where it can be further moistened with enzyme-laden biles, breaking the food down into the nutrients the body requires for growth and repair. Now, smell. Very important. Since the smell of cooked food may reach the consumer before he or she sees it, odor can make a strong influence that taste upon acceptance or rejection. The smell of food should create a pleasurable anticipation of what is to come. Fish and chips cause the saliva to flow. The smell of coffee, the smell of baked bread, all helps the saliva to flow. The noses of normal people are very sensitive and can recognize odor concentrations because they are aided by the memory, which acts as a template of classification. It is more difficult It is more difficult to qualify. It is more difficult, sorry, to quantify smell because as it merely a sensation can only be measured by comparison. The nose contains olfactory receptor cells, and we call that the olfactory epithelium, which are also primary sensory nerve cells. And it is their excitation as promoted by the overall size and shape and color of molecules, which is a determining factor in the characteristics of any smell, whether it is food or any other item. Once the body, our bodies, have attained its optimum level of nutrients in the balanced form, its sensitivity to smell of food decreases, reducing the appetite. More importance is given to the senses of sight and hearing than to smell, yet it is the source of as much pleasure as the first two combined, and it is the most primitive sense of them all, as it enables man to find his first food. So the sense of smell. We smell out our food. Most people use smell not only in their daily lives, but many in their work as farmers, as chefs, as perfume chemists, as tea blender, as wine buyer, and many other trades. And that's why when you taste wine, you smell it. When you blend tea, you smell. And that's why, as a chef, when you taste a soup, you should smell it. Smell the aroma. Very, very important. We smell everything we taste. With unknown foods, we smell first to check and try to distinguish something familiar in their makeup before eating. Always smell first. If you are suffering from a heavy cold, then taste is completely wiped out, as I said, because the nasal membrane, the olfactory epithelium here, is wiped out because the nasal membrane is not functioning and does not pick up the smells as the food passes its base at the back of the mouth. Touch. In terms of gastronomy, it is the mouth that reacts as the organ concerned with tactile sensation. With the tongue, it makes decisions on viscosity, flow, how it flows in the mouth, textures, moisture, and temperature of food offered. The sensation of pressure is exercised by the form of the compression of the teeth, which ranges from 10 kilogram at the incisors to 45 kilogram at the molar teeth. Those people who are used to living on a diet of tough food are capable of exercising even more pressure in mastication, in mashing up the actual food. Mastication breaks food down into chunks that can be easily digested, exposing it to enzymic action, the enzymes, the biological catalysts in the mouth, in the saliva, that assist digestion. Chewing our food more will not result in more flavor release, but certainly speeds up the work of the stomach absorbing it. So this is the Foster's sensory diagram. And you can see that these are the sensory appreciation: cold, sweet, pleasure, salt, warm, sour, pain. All linked to cool, mint, perfume, sweet, floral, etherish, sharp, citral, fruity, sour, spicy, musty, warm, putrid smell, etc. So this is what we call the sensory appreciation diagram. Flavour and taste is a combination of taste and odour, since both involve the interaction of food materials with sensor sites in the mouth, taste buds, and the olfactory region. This is the olfactory region here in my nose, the olfactory epithelium region. And there's a simple diagram for you there, which is a very complicated subject. So the taste buds detect 4 basic tastes: sweet, as I said, mainly at the tip of the tongue; sour, mainly at the sides of the tongue; bitter, mainly at the back of the tongue; salty buds are widely dispersed in the mouth; and solid food can be tasted until partially dissolved by the saliva. The finer distinction of flavour are really dependent on the sense of smell. Our sense of taste is really a defence mechanism, and the flow of saliva, which will aid digestion, can only be triggered by the sensors in the olfactory region. Remember, the olfactory region here is important. Temperature and texture. The sensations of temperature and texture can be experienced by degree and type of sensors around the mouth. Temperature, both real and imaginary, hotness in spices such as pepper and mustard, detected by the irritation of the interior surface of the tongue. That's when people take a chili, they bite it and the tongue reacts and it's irritated. Texture is discerned from nerve endings behind the teeth, which compute the force required by each type of teeth, and other nerve endings at the base of the tongue, which determine the viscosity of the food, the thickness of the food, the flow of the food. It's important when determining the quality, palatability of different types of food and its physiochemical components. And these are the physio components: chemical water, the turidity of fruit and vegetables, carbohydrates, the gelling factor in the mouth, the viscosity, proteins, gelatin and tenderness of meat, fats, creamy, rich texture, also lubricate and aid digestion. Fat is important in meat because when we have intramuscular fat, it lubricates the meat. It adds flavor through lubrication. And then we're back onto odor and palatability. Smells are identified by tiny, delicate, hair-like endings of the olfactory nerves. So, as I said, these are the olfactory, you can see there the olfactory nerves, and you can block them yourself by taking your hand over your nose and tighten them, and you find you can't smell. Attempts have been made to classify odours: burnt, fragrant, but while specialists may develop our weakest sense, it remains effective primarily as a means of determining palatability. We are less aware of possibility of being deceived by our sense of smell than our strongest sense of sight. Remember, our sight tells us so much. Our sense of smell alters as we grow older, as we do our tastes are due largely to losing certain olfactory senses. As we get older, our taste changes. We lose our sense of smell and we lose some of our olfactory senses. And often old people say, oh, the food doesn't taste like it used to. What they mean to say is that I'm losing some of my sensory olfactory senses and I can't taste. It's not the food doesn't taste like it used to. It's because they can't pick up the sensory flavors because they're getting older. And you often hear them say that things taste better in the old days. Not true. It's because they're losing their sense of their certain olfactory senses as people get older. The criteria and the order of appearance will vary from consumer to consumer, but even the most conscious and brand loyal consumers tend to discern a product principally on its palatability. Consumer looks at the commodity, the palatability, the price, the branding, the packaging, and then they purchase. So this is when we develop a product, when we develop a new dish, we're looking at the commodities, the palatability, which is all the senses, and then we brand it and package it. There are also several external factors affecting palatability. Appearance, as we said, palatability, our eyes, smell, flavor, feel, mouthfeel is very important. And that contributes all to palatability. And palatability, as you see, is psychological. It's how we view the food, the color, the social aspect, the cultural, the balance, and our age. And people at different ages review palatability differently. So this is a very complex subject, and food companies throughout the world spend thousands, if not millions of pounds on organoleptic assessment. And they do it very scientifically to test consumers what they think of the smell, the flavor, the mouthfeel, the touch, and they record all the data. Same with tea tasting, coffee tasting, wine tasting. All involves very complex organoleptic assessment. So the message of today is very clear. The importance of understanding organoleptic assessment. What taste is, what palatability is, the acceptance of palatability, and what makes up this sensation. It is the senses, our sight, our hearing, the smell, the auditory, how we crunch, how something's crunchy, and the effect it has on our hearing. These are very complex senses that we have to satisfy and aware of. A sizzled steak. People like to see in a restaurant the steak sizzling. The champagne cork bursting is a sensation. It is an auditory sensation, which all creates an experience. So the experience is around the sight, the smell, the hearing, the taste. And that's what I want you to learn from today's message. I hope that you've got the PowerPoint. I hope that you digest the PowerPoint, you read it, and now I'll take any questions. Any questions? Any questions? Anyone have Any questions? No questions. I hope that was useful. Yeah. Yes, flavor is much more complicated than taste. Flavor is a combination of smell, mouthfeel, and how we chew the food in terms of how we break it up, whether it's crunchy, soft, etc. Yes, you're right. A student is asking for some insight. The frozen food market is a lot of research is done on the frozen food market. There are many products now in the frozen food market that have gone through a lot of rigid testing and organoleptic assessment with consumers. How, when they are produced, how the customer perceives them in terms of the smell, in terms of the mouthfeel, how they're presented. And large food companies would have organoleptic laboratories, a lot of organoleptic laboratories and consumer testing around these senses. So, any more questions? Large companies spend many thousands, if not millions, on organoleptic assessment. Right, Chef can't, yeah. Organoleptic assessment is a crucial part of the product development process. Because when you develop a product, it then goes into a tasting panel and they have tasting booths and people are asked a series of questions on the smell, on the mouthfeel, on the consistency, and it's all the data is recorded on a computer. Organoleptic assessment is a crucial part of product development. What are the consumer expectations on frozen food market is the consumer expectations are that it is palatable, that the food is palatable, that the food reaches their expectation, and it is as good as eating fresh food. And the frozen food market aims to make food as good as eating fresh food. Table margarine is good for your health if it contains certain oils which are unsaturated fats. If it contains a certain number of unsaturated fats, if it's made from olive oil, for example, it is perfect. It is certainly much more healthier than butter. Any other questions? But margarine would have to go through organoleptic assessment. It would have to be color, spreadable, mouthfeel. So margarine would go through a lot of panel organoleptic assessment. And when you produce a dish, a new recipe in the kitchen, you should have an organoleptic panel. You should have a panel of chefs, a panel of consumers to taste the food. And you talk about the smell, the mouthfeel, the presentation. How could frozen food, well, frozen food, the main advantage of frozen food is that it has a shelf life of 3 to 6 months. And many companies, many hotels in the UK have a backlog of frozen food as people at home, so that if there are shortages, they've got frozen food in stock. The big advantage of frozen food is its shelf life, and for that is a major advantage. And frozen food, there is less waste. You only use an order as you want it. Any more questions? I think the thing now is to, in your colleges, is to set up an organoleptic panel. So I will urge you to set up an organoleptic panel, an organoleptic assessment panel. Start thinking about assessing food organoleptically and record all the data. Thank you for listening. I hope that was enjoyable, and I'll see you again soon. Bye now.